On my 75th birthday, my family threw a party, but not for me. It was for my younger brother. I smiled the whole night, clapping, laughing, even raising my glass when they toasted him. But inside, I was breaking. The next morning, I sat down with my lawyer and rewrote my will, leaving everything I owned to him and cutting everyone else out. They found out too late. That night started like any other family gathering, but I had expected something different. 75 years on this earth felt like a milestone worth recognizing. I told myself not to expect too much, but I hoped for at least a warm word, maybe a toast in my honor. Instead, when I walked into the decorated hall, I saw a banner stretched across the wall in bold letters. Happy birthday, Daniel. Daniel, my younger brother by 3 years, the golden boy, the one who had always been quick with a joke, the one people gravitated toward. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the studious one, the shadow. He was the light, and it seemed even at 75 I was still standing in that same shadow. My daughter Margaret brushed past me with a tray of champagne flutes. "Dad, can you hold these for a second? Uncle Danny's about to come in." She didn't look at me again. She didn't notice the way my hands shook as I balanced the glasses. The doors swung open and in came Daniel, smiling as if he'd just won an award. The room erupted. Cheers, whistles, applause. My son Brian shouted, "The man of the hour!" My grandchildren rushed to hug him. Even my older sister Linda, who hardly shows affection, wrapped her arms around him and said, "Oh, Danny, you look wonderful." I stood there, invisible, clapping along with everyone else. "Looking good, Danny," I said, forcing a smile so wide my jaw ached. Not one person turned to see me. The whole night played out like that. Speech after speech praising Daniel's charm and generosity. Toasts raised to his health and his good years ahead. My children doted on him, the same children who barely remembered to call me on Father's Day. At one point, Brian leaned in close and whispered, "Dad, isn't it amazing how Uncle Danny still has so much energy?" "You've got to admire that," I nodded. "Yes, admirable." My voice cracked on the word, but he didn't notice. I told myself to let it go, to swallow the hurt. But then came the cake. A giant sheet cake, white icing, blue letters. My grandchildren carried it out with glowing faces and began singing. My heart leapt for a second, until I saw the words. "Happy birthday, Daniel." The song echoed in my ears. I clapped, I smiled, I even joined in the singing. But inside, something snapped. Not one person stopped to remember me. Not one person thought to share the spotlight even for a moment. If you had looked at me that night, you would have thought I was proud of my brother. And in a way, I was. Daniel was never cruel. He never asked for the spotlight. It just seemed to find him. He had always been kind to me, kinder than most. But that kindness didn't make the humiliation sting any less. Because what hurt wasn't Daniel. What hurt was my family. My children, my sister, my grandchildren, they had all chosen him. They had all forgotten me. I sat at the edge of the room, watching the people I loved most in the world laugh, dance, and cheer for someone else on the night that was supposed to honor me. I felt like a ghost in my own life. A man whose presence didn't matter, even to the people he had raised, supported, and sacrificed for. And yet, I never let the smile leave my face. I never complained. I never reminded them. I laughed at the jokes, clapped for the toasts, even leaned over at one point and whispered to my brother, "Happy birthday." But deep down, I knew I couldn't go on pretending I didn't exist. That night changed something in me. When the laughter faded and the room emptied, I promised myself one thing. I would no longer leave my legacy in the hands of those who treated me like I was invisible. And that is why, the very next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. On my 75th birthday, my family threw a party. You'd expect the kind of night where the guest of honor feels loved, where the children and grandchildren gather close, telling stories, clinking glasses, making sure every moment feels special. That's what I thought it would be. After all, 75 is no small milestone. But the truth is, that party wasn't for me. It was for my younger brother, Daniel. I smiled through the entire night. I laughed at the jokes, clapped at the toasts, even lifted my glass when they raised theirs to him. Outwardly, I looked like the proud older brother, celebrating his sibling's big day. Inside, though, something heavy was pressing on my chest. I felt it with every laugh that wasn't directed at me, every hug I didn't receive, every careless word from my own children. The next morning, I made a decision that no one expected. I went to my lawyer and rewrote my will. I left everything I had, my house, my savings, my belongings, and to Daniel, and I cut everyone else out. When they found out, it was already too late. That night began like any other family celebration. Margaret, my daughter, had told me earlier in the week, "Dad, we've got something special planned." Just be there on time, I thought maybe, just maybe, she remembered how much I wanted to feel acknowledged. I put on my best suit, the one my late wife always liked, and practiced a smile in the mirror. I wanted to look ready, hopeful, and strong. When I walked into the decorated hall, the room shimmered with balloons and streamers. My heart lifted for a brief moment. Maybe they had done this for me. Maybe this was finally my night. But then I saw it. A giant banner stretched across the back wall, letters painted bold and bright. "Happy birthday, Daniel." It felt like someone had slipped the ground out from under me. Margaret rushed by with a tray of champagne flutes. "Dad, hold these for a second, will you? Uncle Danny's about to arrive." She didn't even look up at me after handing them off. She was too busy grinning at the door, and then he walked in. Daniel, with his easy smile and outstretched arms, soaking in the cheers that erupted like fireworks. My son Brian ran to him, slapped him on the back and shouted, "The man of the hour!" My grandchildren swarmed him, hanging on his arms, laughing at his every word. Even my sister Linda, who barely smiles for anyone, hugged him like he was royalty. And me. I stood at the edge, holding that silver tray like a waiter, my hands trembling, trying to keep my face steady. I forced a smile. "Looking good, Danny," I said, though my throat felt tight. The entire evening passed the same way. Speeches about how wonderful Daniel was, toasts to his good health, stories about his kindness, his energy, his humor. My children, my own flesh and blood, couldn't stop praising him. Brian leaned over at one point, lowering his voice. "Dad, isn't it incredible how Uncle Danny still has so much life in him?" "You've got to admire that." "Yes," I answered softly. "Admirable." The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Then came the cake. A grand sheet cake with white icing and blue lettering. The grandchildren carried it out singing "Happy Birthday" with wide smiles. My heart leapt for just a second. This was it. Surely this was mine. But when they turned the cake around, I read the words, "Happy Birthday, Daniel." The room filled with laughter and applause. I clapped too, I sang too, I raised my glass. But inside, something broke. It wasn't Daniel's fault. He'd never been cruel to me. In fact, he'd always been kinder than most. The kind of brother who checked in when no one else did. But kindness couldn't erase the truth. The people who mattered most, my children, my grandchildren, my own sister, had forgotten me. On the one night when I should have been the center, I was invisible. So I did what I always do. I smiled, I clapped, I whispered, "Happy birthday, brother," and let him have the stage, but deep down, I knew something had shifted. That night taught me a lesson that I couldn't ignore. They had shown me exactly where I stood, and I realized I didn't want to leave my legacy to people who treated me like a shadow. That is why the next morning, with the memory of their laughter still echoing in my ears, I rewrote my will. My name is Samuel Whitaker, and by most accounts I've lived a quiet life. Not a bad one, not an extraordinary one, just quiet. I spent nearly 40 years teaching history at the local high school. I loved the work. The smell of chalk, the rows of restless students, the chance to see a spark of understanding in their eyes when a lesson finally landed. It gave me purpose. I was never the kind of man who needed applause or recognition. My satisfaction came from knowing I had done my job, day in and day out. When I retired, the house grew quieter than I ever imagined. My wife, Marjorie, had passed a decade earlier, leaving me with the stillness of creaking floors and rooms that felt too big. My children had long since built lives of their own. Margaret, my daughter, lived 2 towns over. She worked as a nurse, always busy, always rushing. Brian, my son, worked in finance, chasing promotions, moving from city to city. I saw them when schedules allowed, a holiday here, a rushed weekend visit there, but the calls were short, and the visits even shorter. I didn't resent them for it. That's just how life goes. Children grow up, chase their own lives, and parents become the people they wave to in passing. I told myself I understood. I kept myself busy with gardening, books, and the occasional community event. But deep down, I longed for those rare moments when the family came together and I wasn't just a background figure. And that brings me to Daniel, my younger brother. 3 years younger, but always 10 steps ahead when it came to charm. He had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like they were the most important person there. People loved him for it. They always had. Growing up, it was Daniel who got the laughter, the attention, the praise. I was the one who quietly did my homework at the kitchen table while he performed impressions of our teachers for our parents. Even in adulthood, nothing changed. Family dinners always drifted toward his stories, his achievements. My children adored him. They called him Uncle Danny with excitement, ran to him first when he visited. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself it was fine to be the steady one while he was the star. But a part of me, the part that rarely spoke up, wanted to be seen too. That's why I had been looking forward to my 75th birthday. 75 is not just another year. It's a milestone, a moment when a man deserves to be recognized, not for any grand accomplishments, but simply for enduring, for carrying the weight of years, of struggles, of sacrifices. I had been quietly counting down, wondering if maybe, for once, my children would plan something just for me. The week before, Margaret called. "Dad, don't worry about anything. Just be at the hall on Saturday. We've got it covered." Her tone was rushed, distracted, but I clung to those words. We've got it covered. I imagined them planning speeches, maybe putting together a slideshow of my old photos, remembering the years of Christmas mornings and family vacations. The truth is, I wanted to feel like I mattered to them. Not because of money, not because of what I could give, but because I was their father, the man who stayed up nights working extra shifts to pay for Brian's college, the man who drove Margaret to every piano recital, who clapped the loudest even when she missed half the notes, the man who sat beside Marjorie's hospital bed, holding her hand through her final breath, and still kept the family together after she was gone. Yet, despite everything, I felt the distance. Phone calls that lasted 5 minutes, conversations that ended with, Sorry, Dad, I've got to run. Birthdays forgotten or mentioned in passing with a late card. I told myself not to expect too much. Still, I hoped that 75 would be different. That hope carried me into the hall that night. I remember straightening my tie in the car mirror before walking in, whispering to myself, "This is your night. They'll see you." For a man who spent most of his life standing in the background, it was a fragile but powerful hope, and that's what made what followed so devastating. When I first stepped into that hall, I carried with me a fragile kind of hope. I told myself, "Samuel, don't expect too much. Just be grateful they remembered." But hope is a dangerous thing, especially when you're already used to being overlooked. The first sting came quickly. Margaret pressed a tray of champagne flutes into my hands without even making eye contact. "Dad, hold these for a second, will you?" "Uncle Danny's about to come in." I froze, tray balanced in my trembling hands. "Uncle Danny's about to come in." The words felt like ice water poured down my back. This was my birthday. 75 years of life. 75 years of raising them, working for them, being there when no one else was. And yet, all the excitement in her voice was for him. The doors burst open, and Daniel walked in like he always did, smiling, confident, charming. The cheers erupted around me like thunder. My son Brian practically ran to him. "The man of the hour," he shouted, wrapping him in a hug. My grandchildren clung to his arms, laughing at every joke he tossed their way. Even Linda, my older sister, wiped a tear from her eye as she said, "Danny, you look wonderful." I tried to tell myself not to mind. I forced my lips into a smile, my voice into something steady. "Looking good, Danny." No one heard me. My words were swallowed up in the laughter and applause. As the evening wore on, the pattern became painfully clear. The first toast came from Margaret. She raised her glass high. "To Uncle Danny, the heart of this family, the man who's always been there for us." My chest tightened. "The heart of this family." I lowered my eyes, pretending to sip my drink. Brian followed next, clinking his glass. "Here's to Daniel, a man who proves that age is just a number." "You inspire us all." He grinned, looking proud of himself, waiting for the applause. I wanted to stand up and say, "What about me?" "I worked double shifts to put you through school. I drove you to every basketball practice. I stayed when your mother died, when things were falling apart. Wasn't I there?" But the words stayed locked in my throat. Instead, I raised my glass and whispered, "To Daniel." The laughter grew louder with every story told about him. How he once rescued a neighbor's dog. How he always brought the best wine to holidays. How he made people feel special with just a smile. And all the while, I sat in the corner, listening, clapping, smiling until my cheeks ached. Then came the cake. A grand white sheet cake carried in by my grandchildren, their little faces glowing with excitement. My heart surged for just a second. This must be it. This must be for me. But when they turned it around, I read the words written in blue icing. "Happy birthday, Daniel." The song filled the hall, every voice joining in unison. My grandchildren's eyes sparkled as they sang for him, not me. I clapped along, my hands stinging, my throat tight with something between laughter and tears. Brian leaned toward me during the singing, his voice casual. "Dad, isn't it incredible how Uncle Danny still has so much energy at his age? You've got to admire that." "Yes," I said, my voice barely audible. "Admirable." No one noticed the crack in my tone. No one saw the way my hand tightened around my glass. I felt invisible. A ghost in my own life. And the cruelest part was, no one seemed to notice the man they were forgetting. Not one of them remembered that 75 years ago it was me who was born, not Daniel. I sat there, trapped in the noise of my own family celebrating the wrong man, my mind a storm of anger and sorrow. I thought of Marjorie. She would never have let this happen. She would have reminded them. She would have stood up for me. Without her, though, no one did. That night, the conflict wasn't just between me and my family. It was inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to stand on a chair and shout, "This is my night. I am 75 years old today, not him." But another part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime being quiet, being overlooked, told me to stay silent, to smile, to endure. So I smiled, I clapped. I even leaned in toward my brother and whispered, "Happy birthday, Danny." He looked surprised, almost confused, as if he wanted to correct me. But the crowd drowned out whatever he might have said. And that was the moment the truth hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't Daniel I was angry at, it was them. My children, my grandchildren, my sister. The people I had given my life to. They had made their choice that night, and it wasn't me. By the end of the party, my smile had turned into a mask. No one could see the man underneath it, but inside, I was already planning what I would do the next morning. When the last song faded and the lights dimmed, I left the hall with the same polite smile I had worn all evening. I shook hands. I hugged my grandchildren. I even thanked Margaret for organizing everything. No one suspected anything. To them, I looked like a man proud of his younger brother, content to sit in the background, content to be forgotten, but inside, I was hollow. That night, when I returned home, the silence of my house wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I sat in my chair, loosened my tie, and replayed every moment of the evening in my mind. Every laugh, every toast, every glance that passed right over me. The sound of them singing "Happy Birthday" to Daniel echoed in my ears. I thought of Margaret and Brian, my children, the ones I had carried on my shoulders, worked double shifts for, sacrificed vacations and comfort so they could have opportunities I never had, and now they couldn't even remember whose birthday it truly was. I thought of Linda, my sister, who had once leaned on me for help when her marriage fell apart, who now only had eyes for Daniel's charm. And then I thought of Daniel, my brother, the one they had celebrated so easily. He hadn't asked for it. He looked almost embarrassed at times, as though he knew the night didn't belong to him. And that's when the truth hit me. He was the only one who had never made me feel invisible. It was my children, my own blood, who had done that. I sat in the dark, staring at the framed photo of Marjorie on the mantel. She was smiling in that picture the way she always did when she believed in me. "What would you tell me to do, Marge?" I whispered, my voice cracked. "Would you tell me to let it go? To forgive them again?" But the silence gave me my answer. For 75 years, I had been quiet. I had let myself be pushed into the background. I had told myself it didn't matter if they forgot me, as long as they were happy. But now I saw the truth. They had mistaken my silence for insignificance. That night, I went to bed with my decision still forming in my mind. By morning, it had hardened into something clear and irreversible. The next day I dressed in my suit once again, but this time there was no fragile hope in the mirror, only resolve. I drove to my lawyer's office, a small brick building on the corner of Main Street. He looked surprised to see me without an appointment. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, standing to shake my hand. "This is unexpected. What brings you in?" I sat down, folded my hands, and looked him straight in the eye. "I need to make changes to my will." His eyebrows lifted. "Changes?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Major ones." He pulled out a notepad, his pen poised. "All right. What do you have in mind?" I took a deep breath. I want everything, the house, the savings, my belongings, left to my brother Daniel. I want everyone else removed. The pen stopped mid-scratch. He looked up at me. That's quite a decision, Mr. Whitaker. Are you certain about this? It could cause significant conflict. I'm certain, I said, my voice steady. I've spent my life giving to people who don't see me. They made it clear where I stand. Daniel is the only one who's treated me like I mattered. He's the only one who deserves it. He hesitated, studying me. You understand the consequences? Yes, I answered. I understand better than they ever will. As he drafted the paperwork, I thought back to the party, the laughter, the toasts, the cake, and I realized something powerful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be silent. My action wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It wouldn't come in the form of a shouted speech or a slammed door. It would come in ink, in a legal document that spoke louder than any words I could have said that night. By the time I signed my name at the bottom of the page, a strange calm settled over me. The storm inside me was quiet. I had taken control. Walking out of that office, the sun seemed brighter. The air felt lighter. For once, I wasn't just enduring. I had made a choice, and though my family didn't know it yet, that choice would change everything. I didn't live long after my 75th birthday. A few weeks later, my body, worn from years of quiet sacrifice, simply gave in. There was no drama, no pain, just a final sleep that carried me away. When I was gone, my family gathered, expecting the usual rituals: tears, mourning, and then, eventually, the business of inheritance. To them, it must have seemed like another box to check off. Dad's gone, now let's settle what he left us. I wasn't there to see it, but I know exactly how it played out. They sat in my lawyer's office, the same room where I had signed my name not long before. Margaret was probably impatient, tapping her foot, already thinking about the bills she could cover with her share. Brian, I imagine, leaned back in his chair, smug with certainty that he'd inherit the house, the one he once told me he'd probably sell, because it's too old-fashioned anyway. My sister Linda sat stiffly, her arms folded, confident she would get something for all her years of loyalty. And then there was Daniel, quiet, uneasy. He had never cared much for money, and I knew he dreaded this moment. If anyone suspected that my will would favor him, it wasn't Daniel. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. To my daughter, Margaret, and my son, Brian, I leave the memories of a night that taught me everything I needed to know. To my sister, Linda, I leave the silence that was given to me when I needed to be remembered. And to my brother, Daniel. I imagine the air in that room turned sharp, every ear straining to catch the next words. I leave my home, my savings, and all I have built in this life. Because in a world where I was invisible, you never let me disappear. The shock must have been instant. Margaret would have gasped, her voice rising in disbelief. What? That can't be right. He wouldn't do this, Brian. Red-faced, probably slammed his hand against the table. This is insane. He was our father. He can't just leave us with nothing. Linda's lips, thin and tight, likely twisted into a scowl. This must be a mistake. Daniel, what did you do? But Daniel. I can picture him sitting still, his eyes wide, tears forming. He would have shaken his head slowly, his voice breaking. I didn't do anything. I swear. I never asked for this. The lawyer would have continued, pulling out the final letter I had left with my will, my words, written in my own hand, speaking for me when I could no longer speak for myself. To my children, who forgot me on the night of my 75th birthday, you reminded me that love without respect is hollow. He reminded me that sometimes blood ties are not enough. I gave you my years, my labor, and my loyalty. But that night, you showed me where I truly stood. To my brother Daniel, you never forgot me. You never let me feel invisible. For that, you have my gratitude. My legacy is yours, because you treated me with the dignity my own children did not. The letter ended simply, "This is not punishment, it is truth. And truth at last is what I leave behind." I can hear Margaret's voice rising, sharp with anger. "This isn't fair. He was our father. We deserve, but deserve. That's the word they never understood. Deserve is earned, not inherited by default." I imagine Daniel's tears spilling as he clutched the letter to his chest. "Sam," he whispered, maybe too softly for anyone else to hear. "Why me?" Because he had always been there. Because he saw me when no one else did. Because when the rest of them turned my birthday into a celebration for someone else, Daniel was the only one who looked at me with quiet recognition, as if to say, "I know this is your night too, brother." The silence in that office must have been suffocating, broken only by the protests of those who had thought my love would translate into wealth. But my decision was final. My will was signed. My legacy had been passed. And in that moment, even in death, I had finally spoken louder than their laughter, louder than their toasts, louder than their neglect. I wasn't alive to see the fallout from my decision, but I don't have to guess. My family's reactions were written into their faces the night of that party, and I know exactly how they responded once my will was read. Margaret, my daughter, was furious. She stormed out of the lawyer's office, her voice raised so loud that the receptionist must have heard every word. How could he do this to us? After everything we've done for him, done for me. The phrase must have felt sour even as she said it. I wonder if she thought about that night, about how she handed me a tray of champagne glasses without looking at me. Did she remember how her words, "Uncle Danny's about to come in," cut deeper than she ever realized? Or did she just tell herself I had acted out of spite? Brian, my son, tried to fight it. He threatened legal action, argued that I must have been manipulated, that I hadn't been in my right mind. But the ink was clear, the signatures were valid, and my lawyer stood by every word I had dictated. No one had coerced me. It had been my choice, deliberate and final. Linda, my sister, fell silent. For a woman who always had something sharp to say, I imagine the stillness was deafening. Maybe she understood better than the rest. She had known me since childhood, had seen me fade into the background of our family gatherings, had watched Daniel take the spotlight again and again. Perhaps she realized, at last, that she too had let me vanish without protest. And then there was Daniel, my brother. Unlike the others, he wept. He clutched the letter I had left him and sat in disbelief. He had never asked for anything from me, never expected to inherit a dime. For him, the weight of my decision was not joy or triumph, but grief. He carried the burden of knowing I had felt so forgotten by the people I loved most that I chose him instead. But Daniel, being who he was, did not hoard what I left him. He didn't gloat, he didn't throw my children out of the house or cut them off. Instead, he did something that would have made Marjorie proud. He opened the house, my house, now his, for family gatherings. He welcomed Margaret and Brian, even when they came reluctantly, even when their bitterness still hung in the air. He told them, "This was your father's home. You're always welcome here." In that way, Daniel became the bridge I never could. Still, my children could not escape the truth. Every time they walked through that door, every time they looked at the mantel where my photo rested beside Marjorie's, they were reminded of the choice I had made. My absence was louder than my presence had ever been. I know it hurt them. I know they struggled to reconcile the father they thought would always forgive with the man who had drawn a final line. And perhaps that was the point. Not to punish, but to force them to see me, really see me, even if it was too late. What I hope lingers with them is not anger, but understanding. That love without attention is shallow. That respect is not a given, even between parent and child. That a man who gives his life to his family still needs to be acknowledged, still needs to feel seen. If I could speak to them now, I would not shout, I would not scold. I would simply say, when you ignore someone's worth, you risk losing them long before they're gone. And I would tell them this too, I never stopped loving them. Even as I signed that will, even as I chose Daniel, my love for my children did not vanish. But love without respect cannot carry on forever. In the end, I left behind more than a house or savings. I left behind a lesson. A reminder that presence is not enough. It must be paired with recognition, with gratitude, with respect. Daniel honored me in ways my children did not. That's why I chose him. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I wanted them to learn. And if they remember me now, not as the man who quietly clapped at the back of the room, but as the father who finally made his voice heard, then maybe, just maybe, they'll understand. That was my legacy. Not the money, not the house, the lesson. Because sometimes the loudest thing a man can leave behind is the truth he could never say in life. That's the story of how my 75th birthday changed everything. A night that began with silence ended with a decision that spoke louder than words. Stories like this remind us that being seen, being valued, matters more than anything else. If this story moved you, or made you think about the people in your own life, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about family, choices, and the truths we sometimes learn too late, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me keep bringing these stories to life. Until next time, remember, don't wait until it's too late to show someone that they matter.